Hi, and welcome to my first video on small disc golf. I'm Howard Cohen, and today I'm going to be talking about 3D printing golf discs. I've been doing it for a while, and this is one of them. I print them with a base on them. There's a brim around it. You might be able to see the underside a little easier. I've taken the brim off of this one. The brim helps it be more stable. I print them vertically, like this. And that gives me much better definition around the curves. In particular, the very base here, like this here. It's a very sharp angle, much more than 45 degrees, but it works. However, I did run into a problem when I was first printing them, which was hairy discs. You see all that fuzz on there? That is not caused by a cat. I didn't know what it was causing. In fact, I didn't even know what it was called. I tried searching for terms like fuzz and things like that. This is stringing. And there's various solutions, everything from increase retraction to reduce retraction to you can't do anything about it, so don't worry about it, to some very interesting other settings that I explored, but which did not work. So I finally did find a solution to this fuzzy problem, and it was not what I thought. Turned out the solution was to have no retraction at all. No retraction, so that when it's extruding and it wants to move around, it doesn't move the head up at all. It drags it over what it just finished, kind of like it was ironing it. Ironing is a feature that you can turn on in the slicer, but I found that the retractions were really a problem. So let me show you what I did in the slicer. Here you can see the slicer, and that's me over there. Let's see, it's a little better. So here is this disc, and I'm going to zoom in here a little bit so you can see it here. And I just sliced it right out of the box. Directly sliced it right out of the box. And this is what it looked like. And if we descend down through it, I told it that I wanted 15% infill, like that. You can see that there's a lot of infill in here, especially like that up the top. And if we look down at the bottom, you can see the disc disappearing into my print base, which I guess you could call a raft, but I tried using raft and I needed something very specific. It had to be a 0.5 millimeter thick. So what I found that worked better was to make a few changes to it. And so the first change that I make is I add more perimeters, 3, 4. So I gave it 4 perimeters. And, you know, I tried doing it with 100% infill, and that really didn't help. It turns out that 0% infill is what I want. And then skirt and brim, I wanted 10 around the outside like that. And no space, that's a brim width of 10, and no separation between the brim and the object, which in my case is the print base. So I kind of want them to stick together. And then over here in printer settings, if you go to the extruder, this is where you tell it not to lift up. And this is what causes it to do the ironing. And so now I'm going to go back to the plater, and I'm going to go back to this. and I'm going to slice it again. And now you can see that it has a better way of handling filling in. It fills it in. Here, let me get rid of some of these extra options here. I was looking where the retractions were and where the travel was. You can see that now there's very little of this infill. It's done with extra layers. And because it never lifts up, it never pulls a string. Here is what it looks like to draw a layer. And it's not really lifting up much until it finishes. Now, it had to jump up right there to get in there to fill in a little piece there. And you can see that it's going to have to fill that in, and this in, and that in, and it will do that now. Fills in that one, fills in that one, fills in that, there's that, and that. And you can see on the other layers, as it goes, it has almost no infill at all there. So because it's never lifting up, it irons the top on every layer, and it doesn't move around very many times. This minimizes the number of times it moves around. And there it is disappearing into the print base, and there is the different layers of the print base. I wouldn't recommend more than about 3 layers of print base. So this is a new print of a disc called the Flexi. It's already printed the print base, and now it is beginning to print the actual disc. And you can see it's just going back and forth. It looks like it's painting a line. Here's a larger view. I'm sorry it isn't better focused. I don't have a better camera for this. As it works, you'll see that it has to go further and further on the side. And there's an overlap there. That's part of why I use a very thin layer height, like 0.15 millimeters, so that the actual amount of overlap is not that great, even when the angle is great, because the layer is wide compared to its height. Its aspect ratio is very thin. And that works pretty well. But even as it is, sometimes when the head is moving, those little edges that are developing right now on the left and right, the most extreme points out there, sometimes they will curl up, but they're still warm, they're still kind of hot, and the head can sort of push them back down into shape, and then the next layer kind of holds them there. So even if it doesn't look great at the very beginning, it works. It corrects itself. The one thing that you have to watch out for is that the print base and the brim around it cannot come off. Right now, only a little bit of the disc has printed, but when it's near the top, there's really quite a lever arm, and so even the force of extrusion, which is the friction of the head against the printed object, that force of extrusion is enough to break the disc free if it didn't have a really firm grip on the print bed. That's why it has such a big print base, which is like 20 millimeters, and also the brim. You could experiment with smaller ones, but it's actually a very small amount of waste. The print base is 0.5 millimeter thick, and the brim is 1 layer thick. So as it works its way through the disc, it gets to the middle part, which is never an issue. At the very top, you run into a bit of an issue, which I can show you here. Right in here is the very top of the disc. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see it with this camera. There you go. It's not great. It's right in here. these little bumps. It should look perfect like that, and instead you get these little drips and drabs, and I usually just sand those away. I use a sanding tool like this on the lowest possible speed to sand these. Here's a base on a disc. I just break it off like that. I'll do a little shaping, very light, because it generates a lot of heat very quickly. That's enough there, and you can see inside here, there's a little bit of nonsense. It's enough. And that is enough to get this disc ready to fly. So let's check in on the print again. So here's two views. You can see sort of a front view and sort of a side view. And if you watch that extruder on the right, you'll see it does not go up and down. It just keeps going around. If it's got to travel from one end to the other, it still doesn't go up and down. And so if it was going to string, it would just basically squish those strings right back in. I found that when it lifted, no matter how much it lifted, if it lifted at all, it pulled a little bit of plastic up with it, and then if the next thing it did was move, it created a string. And it didn't matter where I put the seam and things like that. It did not matter. It's working great now, though. It takes about an hour and 20 minutes to print the smallest of the discs, and about 2 hours and a half to print the biggest or thickest of the discs. It all depends on how much plastic is in it, of course. I'm printing these in PLA on a Prusa Mk3S Plus that I just got and assembled, and it worked great, and it's done a really great job of printing these discs. This printer is usually running making discs. Thanks for watching. Here's some links in case you'd like more information. SmallDiscGolf.org is the main website. There's all kinds of pages there, including how to make these discs, how to design these discs, how to print them, how to throw them, an owner's manual for them. But here's a couple of quick links for you as well. The printing discs page leads you right to text about what you just saw and some pictures. And the last one is a library of downloadable models, including the ones that you saw me with today, as well as several others. You can download them and print them. They've already got the print base on them, so there's no difficulty. Maybe just add the brim and do the different things that I did, 4 layers in your slicer. No infill, and it should print great. Thanks again.